Hello and welcome to Starting a Men's Team Ministry to the widowed and single parents in your church. This is the second of our series of 6 videos and it's called Planning Your Men's Team Ministry. And to begin with, first of all, we just want to remind you that you need to make sure that you have final approval for your men's team ministry, that you've gone to your church leadership, explained to them what the ministry is all about, and gotten your approval. And once you have that, now you're ready to begin planning the implementation of your men's team ministry in your church. So the first thing you need to do is you need to decide on your leadership team. Now, a couple things to remember. Simplicity is in organization is a key to longevity. If it's not simple, the more complexity you have in your leadership, the more likelihood you're going to have that it's just not going to last very long. So remember to keep it simple. But on the other hand, multiple leaders are also a key to longevity. And the reason for that is because again, there's going to be transitional times in your ministry, and so it's important to make sure that you have continuity in leadership. And one way to do that is to have more than one leader. So keeping those two elements in mind, simplicity on the one hand, multiple leaders on the other, and you're going to be able to have a long-term leadership team for your ministry. Let's talk about the types of leadership that you can have for your men's team ministry. First of all, your pastor or your men's ministry leader in your church can be the leader of your men's team ministry, of course. Many pastors like to do this. It's a great way to spend time with their men, disciple their men. Pastors love to do devotional times, for example. And so that is definitely one model that your church may decide on. Your pastor may decide that he'd like to do that role. On the other hand, he may want to delegate that role. And so another model is for you, the layman, and your pastor to both lead the ministry together. Perhaps one way you can do this is the pastor can do the devotional time and you can do the organizational elements of the ministry, contacting everybody, making sure everybody is fulfilling their roles. A third model is for you to lead the ministry alone. And again, this is a simple way to do the ministry, but one of the problems I have with this particular model is that it does not provide for a transitional leader if you were to get called somewhere else, if you moved away, even passed away. And so you need to account for the reality that at some point in the future, you're not going to be able to lead this ministry, and so you need to provide a way to transition through that. A fourth model is for you and another layperson to lead the ministry. This can work very well. You can alternate doing the devotional time every other month, or one person can take over that responsibility permanently. Another person can take over the organizational aspect of the ministry. And so this is one model that I highly recommend. A fifth model is a committee of men leading the ministry. The saying goes that a camel is a horse put together by a committee. And unless your church is really good at doing committees, I don't know that I would really recommend having 5, 6, 7 guys on a committee running your men's ministry, because it adds complexity to the ministry and that makes it a little bit more difficult to keep the ministry running smoothly. So you need to decide on what type of leadership you're going to have, who's going to lead the ministry, how are you going to lead it, and then whoever is leading the ministry, you need to make sure that they have their roles defined and that they are knowledgeable about what the men's ministry to widows and single parents is all about, so that they can carry out the philosophy of the ministry and not just go through the motions. So once you've decided on your leadership team, the next thing you need to do is you need to develop your policy. Policy is very important because it tells men what the church expects from them, what they can do, what they should do, and what they can't do or should not do. And so we have in our workbook a suggested policy for churches, and of course this is not a requirement because we're not a franchise ministry, but we do recommend policies for churches. And I encourage you to also read my blog, Developing a Church Policy Statement for Your Men's Team Ministry. That's an important blog to read. It'll give you some really good suggestions on policy. I strongly recommend that in your policy that you require at least 2 men going to the home of a care receiver. Or another way to put it is no caregiver goes to the home alone. This is really important. God's used this to protect the ministry, not just care receivers, but also caregivers. We want everything above board. And so I highly recommend that you at least have that as your policy for your men's team ministry. And then what you want to do is you want to get your policy statement reviewed and approved by your church leadership, have them go through it point by point. I would encourage you to keep your policy simple. And the reason for that is because you want your men to remember it. You know, you could have a pages long policy statement and somebody types it up, you wind up putting it in a drawer and nobody remembers it. So you want to keep your policy statement simple. You're not going to be able to cover every possible contingency, but you do want to cover basic practices and basic principles in your policy statement. But keep it simple so your men can remember it. And then be sure and review your policy statement when you're training them during the first orientation, and when you have your new men coming into your ministry later on. You want to make sure that they understand your policy for the ministry so that they are doing what the church wants them to do. And then what you want to do is you want to begin, you want to set a schedule for implementation. Now, what you want to do is you want to keep 3 dates in mind. The first date is your orientation meeting. This is probably the most important date, when you are going to actually meet to introduce your men to the ministry and train them and form your teams. I suggest that you make this about 2 months after you form your leadership team. That'll give you plenty of time to do what you need to do to get ready for that orientation meeting. And then the next date is your first service day. This should be a month after your orientation meeting. And you need to have this date in hand when you do your orientation meeting so that at the end of the orientation meeting, when you form your teams and your men leave, they need to know when they're going to meet next and what they're going to be doing on that first service day. So have the date planned for your first service day 1 month after your orientation meeting. And then the third date you want to have is the start of your promotional campaign. That should be a month prior to your orientation meeting. So you want a full month in it to be able to promote well your men's team ministry. So you want to allow at least 2 months between the time of when you form your team and when your leadership team and when you do your orientation meeting. And I suggest that you hold your orientation meeting on the same day of the month and at the same time that you're going to be doing your service days. For example, if you have your service day on, say, the first day of the month and you're planning on starting your service days at 7 in the morning at the church for your prayer and Bible study time, then hold your orientation meeting at that time. First day of a month, 7 a.m. And the reason for that is some guys aren't going to be able to make that time, but then, of course, they're probably not going to be able to make service days at that time as well. So by holding your orientation meeting at the same time as your service days, you are just naturally weeding out the guys that probably wouldn't be able to do the ministry anyway. And then I suggest holding the orientation meeting for a couple of hours, at least 2, maybe even 3 hours, so that you have plenty of time to go through the orientation DVD or video and to form your teams, explain your policy, and to just make sure that you have everything that you need all the time that you need to do your organization. And then make sure that your orientation meeting does not conflict with any major church events. Plan ahead, look at your church calendar or call the church office. Make sure there is nothing that is conflicting, at least nothing major that is conflicting with your orientation meeting, so that you can maximize attendance at your orientation. And then you want to schedule your first day for a month after your orientation. And then, of course, you want to announce this at your orientation. And then you want to schedule the promotional campaign for 1 month prior to your orientation. And then, all things being equal, I think the second Saturday of the month is really the best Saturday to hold your service days, to hold your orientation. And the reason for that is because you miss a lot of holidays by holding your service days on the second Saturday of the month. For example, during the summer, most of the holidays fall on either the first Saturday of the month or the first weekend of the month. And during the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, most of all of your holidays fall at the end of the month. So by holding your service day on the second Saturday of the month, you miss those holidays, and you don't have to reschedule or go through the whole hassle of having to reschedule so you miss a particular holiday. So that makes it very, very easy to do your scheduling. Okay, so very simple. You want to make sure you're implementing your men's team ministry well. So here's the checklist that we want to look at. The first point is we want to confirm, again, that we have approval from the church leadership to proceed. And then you want to decide on the type of leadership team you want to have. You want to recruit your leadership team and define the roles. You want to develop your policy statement and get input and approval from your church leadership. And you want to set the dates for your orientation meeting, your first service day, and the start of your promotional campaign. Okay, so you have introduced the church and your church leadership to men's team ministry, and now you're in the process of making actual concrete plans. What an exciting time it is for your church and for your men, and especially for the widows and widowers and single parents in your church. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again in our next video.